Oh, maybe we should all put our cell phones off, including myself. Huh?
Can you hear me? Oh, so I brought sound effects. So in case you don't laugh at my jokes, I brought my own laughter.
I like to see it.
And then if during audience question time, if you have no question, I'll say any questions, and there are no question, I do this. See, I came prepared.
We worked on this for hours, too. So welcome, all of you. I appreciate you coming out on this rainy evening. I know for some of you it was a struggle getting here. It was for me, actually. I just got out of the operating room and zoomed over here. My name is Jim Doty. I'm the director of the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, which most of us just call CCARE because it's a lot shorter. This is an ongoing conversation called Conversations on Compassion, and the purpose of getting together like this is to have informal conversations with people who, by who they are, the work that they do, really exemplify caring for others and compassion in action. And tonight's guest actually is a dear friend of mine who has actually been on this journey with me in terms of Project Compassion at Stanford, really almost since its inception. Chade-Meng Tan, which is his formal name, to most of you is just Meng. I don't know if how many of you know Meng, but one of the first interactions or connections I had was when somebody showed me an article from the New York Times. Meng is a longtime engineer at Google, and we'll talk about this a little more. Growing up very shy somehow motivated him to try to get in every picture of every person of importance who came to Google. And in fact, there's actually a wall called Meng's Wall at Google. So essentially, every important person in the world is there with a picture with Meng next to them. So it's, and this was actually written up in the New York Times, actually. But really how Meng and I first connected was through a dear friend, a mutual friend of ours, a fellow by the name of Joel Finkelstein. And Joel actually had been working with Meng at Google with him on the Search Inside Yourself project, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and actually which is the title of his New York Times bestseller, which we'll also talk about. But so I had met Joel. Joel introduced me to Meng, and we immediately had a connection. And the mission that I had started in regard to CCARE really resonated with me. And I think most of you know His Holiness the Dalai Lama ultimately gave me a significant donation to start CCARE, and he is really our founding benefactor. And the next person on board after that, who I think was moved not only by our mission, but because of his great respect for His Holiness, made a significant donation as well. And in fact, now we have the Meng Wu Lectureship. And that's really our prominent lectureship that we do every quarter or so. The other thing that Meng and I have been tied up with together, besides the things I've already mentioned, is a good friend of ours, Mathieu Ricard, who I think Meng mentions in his book, and I think some of you may know as people call him the happiest man in the world. He's a Buddhist monk, and he does really incredible work in regard to health care in Bihar state in India, as well as in Tibet and Nepal. And Meng and I, every few years, do a charity event to support that work, and sort of we're tied together with that too, and that's also been a wonderful blessing, I think, for us. So without further ado, I think we'll get started. Welcome my guest, Meng, and we'll begin. Thank you. If any of you have seen the videos with the Dalai Lama, you can see that Meng has already followed suit and takes his shoes off. So I may do that myself. I'm not quite as enlightened yet. I'm hoping by that pretty soon I'll be able at least to take one shoe off. So I think a lot of people know something about you. One of the things I'm always interested in people who dedicate their lives to a cause, and I think maybe you can tell us what that cause is ultimately, but really, I know you grew up in Singapore, and I know you're shy. But you're not so shy anymore, or at least you've overcome that because your belief in what you're doing now. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about growing up and how that impacted you and brought you to the point where you not only became an engineer, but became interested in contemplation and Buddhism and the path that you're on today.
Anybody minds if I tell a long story? Okay. Yeah. If you fall asleep, just let me know if you fall asleep. Nobody ever does that. I don't know why. Just kidding. So I came from Singapore. When I was growing up, I was very smart when I was young. So my IQ was measured at 156. I learned to read at the age of 18 months. And then when I was 12, I learned to program the computer on my own. By 13, I learned assembly language programming on my own, which back then was huge, by the way. By 15, I won my first national competition in programming. By 17, I was like championship. I was a champion, and so on, right? So when I finally get to Google, I told Eric Schmidt, we went out for a walk. I told Eric, who was then CEO, I said, Eric, I'm the best my country has to offer. And then Eric says, in that case, it must be a very small country. Which is true, unfortunately. So growing up, I can tell you the moment I became a Buddhist. It happened in a moment, which was I was listening to a talk by a Buddhist nun. She was American, or she is still American, but a nun of the Tibetan tradition, sort of like you. And during the talk, I remember one sentence, and that one sentence is, it is all about cultivating the mind. And there and then, everything in my life made sense. Right? So my first person experience of that moment is I understood everything. Everything made sense. And then I told myself at the moment, from this moment on, right here, right now, I'm a Buddhist. And I learned meditation after that. So that began a journey. The other thing that I don't talk about a lot, but I think I'm free to talk about it now, because it's only between us and the million other people watching this on YouTube, is that when I was young, I was not just shy, I was really unhappy. I was really, really unhappy. So my default state of mind was, I wouldn't say depression, but I was just miserable. And then, compare it to now, like fast forward to like in the future, my default changed, right? So in the past, if nothing good happened, I was just miserable. And then today, if nothing happens, nothing bad happens, I'm jolly. Right? I'm so jolly, it became my job title. Right? I'm just happy all the time. So something shifted. And I knew what it was. It was meditation. My meditation practice changed my set point of happiness from misery to jolliness. So one day in 2003, I was taking a walk around the old Google campus. It was in August. I don't remember exactly which day, but I remember what happened. I was taking a walk, and then it just came to me. You know that the moment you have in your life where you knew what you're going to do for the rest of your life? So I had that moment. And in that moment, my thought was, I want to spend the rest of my life creating the conditions for world peace. World peace. And the trigger for that thought was contemplating on this experience of moving my happiness set point. Like if I can do it, right, the whole world can do this. And then we can create the conditions for world peace in my lifetime. That was it.
We're done. We're done. Well, actually, let me though go back a little bit because you were saying your default mode was unhappiness.
Right.
And was this a manifestation of it just happened that way? Was it a condition that some event happened to you? Was it the environment? Or it just was a state you fell into and had no understanding of how to get out?
The real answer is I don't know. I have a theory. My theory is that people who are smart, they have a very tough life. I mean, I'm not a genius, but genius is associated with depression. And so the closer you are to high IQ, the more likely you are to be depressed.
Most people, I'm always happy.
So I think that's where I was coming from.
Yeah.
So what happened? What changed that? There is a quality of mind in Sanskrit and in Pali is called sukha. And the definition of sukha, the sukha has been translated to English in many different ways. It's been translated as bliss, happiness, right? What's the word? Yeah, I think bliss is the most common translation. However, the best translation is the most technical translation, which is non-energetic joy. So it turns out that in Buddhist psychology, there are two types of joy. Energetic joy, piti, and non-energetic joy, sukha. And they're qualitatively different. So non-energetic joy, what is so good about this, about sukha? Sukha is non-energetic, and because of that, it has two features. The first feature is that because it doesn't require energy, because it's non-energetic, it is very faint, it's very subtle. So the only way to access it is when the mind is calm and quiet. Then you can access sukha. The second feature, because it's non-energetic, because it doesn't require energy, is highly sustainable. And the implication of that is this: once your mind is quiet, once you're able to quiet your mind on demand, then you have access to sukha, and it's a sustainable source of happiness, and therefore, since from that point on, you'll always be happy. You'll always be happy. So that was for me, how I reached that point.
Do you think, and I think many people would agree with this, oftentimes people with high IQ,
Yes.
They have difficulty with social skills because
Yes.
they're thinking someplace else, and it's hard to connect when you're you're in a different place, if you will,
Right.
and that sort of creates that environment. Would you say, though, then that you have learned through this practice, or that this has allowed you to connect better?
Yes, I would. In fact, let me give you the overall framework. The framework of practice, there are actually three components of meditative practice. And I think every meditator should do all three. So the first component is the component of calmness or serenity or concentration. So samadhi or shamatha. Right? So that's the first one. In other words, the ability to calm your mind on demand. So that's one. The second is vipassana, insight, which means based on the mind of calmness and serenity, using that mind to clearly reflect on self, to see insight into the self, specifically into the process of emotion, the process of cognition, and the process of self. So, insight. There's a third component, a third leg, which is what the Buddhists call the Brahma Viharas, right? The four sublime states. And I think we can translate it as nourishment of the heart. And the four states are kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity. Right? So once you have a complete practice with all these three, and they sort of feed on each other, right, then one of the effects is your social life improves. Yeah, sort of like me, I think.
Well, it's interesting because I don't think there's any question, and it's not necessarily for just people who are smart. I mean, there are people who if you will, are unhappy. Their default mode is that, some people wake up and say, this is a great day, and under the exact same circumstance, another person wakes up and says, life sucks. Right. Why is that? For people who, and obviously, as you're talking about, you're a Buddhist, one of the things we've spent a lot of time with at CCARE is the creation of this compassion cultivation program, which you're very well aware. I think for some people, though, the challenge is, Buddhism doesn't necessarily resonate with me, but how do I get there?
Right.
And maybe you can just give us...
Buddhism doesn't resonate. It's very easy. All we have to do is secularize Buddhism. Right? Secularize it to the degree that there is no Buddhism left. There's only Dharma, or the practice. Or Dharma is defined as universal law. There's only the benefits. How do you do that? Well, I've been trying to do that for a while, right? I mean, that's what I do. It turns out it is very easy. It's so easy that sometimes it requires zero effort. Let me give you an example. The basic practice of Buddhist meditation, bringing attention to the process of breathing. Right? So you bring attention here, and every time your mind wanders away, bring it back. How much effort does it take to secularize this? Zero. Because it's already secularized. Right? And then the next, more advanced practices, like bring attention to the body. Zero secularization, because it's already secular. And so on, even the more advanced practices, even compassion. I give you an example. So one of the compassion practices, which the Dalai Lama does, is Tonglen, which means giving and receiving. What do you give, what do you receive? Tonglen is when you receive the pain and suffering of everybody else, you transform it in your heart into goodness, and you give out goodness. How much secularization? Zero, right? Because there is no religious component to that. There is, however, this is a little bit tricky. Even though it do not need to be secularized, there's a little bit of fluffiness in there. So yeah, you breathe in suffering, you breathe out goodness. That's for people in Berkeley, right? or your favorite hippie town, right? So the challenge wasn't in secularization for me. The challenge was to, in my thinking, de-fluffify it, make it substantial, make it tangible. So in the case of Tonglen, for example, the way I would describe it is in the framework of mental habits, right? So maybe I give you another example, which is easier to understand. The mental habit of kindness. So what is kindness? What is loving kindness? Loving kindness is when you see a human being, and the first thought is, I wish for this person to be happy. Any human being, I wish for this person to be happy. That thought, the way to train that is mental habits, right? Because if you see a human being and there's a habit of wishing for whoever you see to be happy, eventually that becomes who you are. It becomes a character. So the practice of loving kindness, in the practice, you imagine somebody and you imagine, I wish for this person to be happy, and so on. There's no magic in that. The only thing it's doing is it's creating a mental habit so that when you get out of your cushion and you walk around the street, you have the habit of wishing people to be happy, and then you have loving kindness. Right? So therefore, we have to frame this in the framing of creating mental habits. And in the case of Tonglen, the way it works, the extra oomph, is visualization. Because you're visualizing like people suffering as dark, disgusting, gooey stuff, and you breathe it all in, and you transform it into light and breathe it out. There's no magic in breathing the gooey stuff in the light. But what happens is by visualizing it, we are making use of the visual cortex, right, the back of the brain. And in general, if you can see it, you can remember it better. So therefore, all we're doing is to use the visual context to reinforce a mental habit. Right? So once you put it that way, everybody understands.
Well, and I think for us at CCARE, and I think you found in your own...
Sorry, I'm a bit excited. This is exciting topics for me.
This is one of my
love this
strengths. I
topic.
excite people. One of the things, obviously, that we're interested in at CCARE, and I think Ming has been interested in, and I think we talk about fluffiness, is, he works with engineers, and he obviously is an engineer, and engineers don't do well with fluffiness, right?
Precisely.
And they want metrics, and they want science, and I think that's, and we'll talk about your book in a bit, but you have developed the Search Inside Yourself program.
Yes.
And maybe you can talk about the development of this over time, and basically, while you may be excited, unless you put it into the right framework for your colleagues, they'll look at you and go fluffy, 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 and run away.
That's right, precisely.
Yeah, so maybe you can tell us what the process was and some of your insights, and maybe we can talk about a little of the research.
So the history of Search Inside Yourself.
And maybe you can just, explain exactly what that means.
Okay. So remember I talked about creating the conditions for world peace? I didn't tell you how I was going to do it, right? So how do we create the conditions for world peace? I said, easy. All we have to do is to scale inner peace, inner happiness, and compassion, and make this scale worldwide. Because if these qualities are scaled globally, we will have world peace, or at least have the conditions for world peace. How do we do that? Easy. We just have to align these qualities with business success and personal success. And the idea is that if we can help people succeed, and we can help businesses earn more money, with inner peace, inner happiness, and compassion being the unavoidable side effect, then they'll spread. Right? Anything that's good for business and good for people will spread. How do they do that? Right? I figured that out. Easy. By the way, it took months. Every step took months to figure out. So it wasn't as easy as I tried to make it to be.
So this is like the, building the Earth in 7 days or something this.
7 very, very long days.
Days.
Yeah. The way to do that, at least in my opinion, is emotional intelligence. Why? Because everybody already knows the EI or EQ. EI is good for my career. We all know that, right? If I have more emotional intelligence, I'm going to get my damn promotion, right?
Well, maybe you can explain what emotional intelligence is.
Yeah, okay. And also it works on the business level, right? Every employer knows if my people have more EI, I'm going to earn more money. So it's pre-marketed already. So all we have to do is to create a curriculum for emotional intelligence that actually works for adults and engineers, with the side effect necessarily being inner peace, happiness, and compassion.
So I mean, I think, maybe what you're saying, and as I understand it, is, so I don't know if all of you know about emotional intelligence. I'm sure most of you do. But, obviously there's one aspect of analytical intelligence. But really, I think success in life and success in business is interpersonal and intrapersonal.
Yes, correct. Yeah. So as you say, there are two major aspects of emotional intelligence. So the first is intrapersonal. So being aware of my emotions, understanding where they're coming from, and being able to manage it, and being able to motivate myself. So that's the intrapersonal aspect. The interpersonal aspect is the other side of it, right? Understanding you, knowing where you're coming from, and then being able to serve you in a way that's also good for everybody, including myself. So that's basically emotional intelligence. Another way to look at EI, and this is important, another way to look at emotional intelligence is that it's a collection of emotional skills. And this is important because all skills are trainable. Therefore, if EI is a collection of emotional skills, then EI must be trainable. And it turns out to be true.
And I think really that's that's the point of what we do at CCARE. We try to understand the scientific basis, if you will, of emotions and the processes to integrate them into your life for positive change. And of course, that being said, while there may be a thermometer which can be adjusted, the boundaries of those changes are finite, and in some people are genetically determined or not, and in the sense that they may have some difficulties actually integrating some of these behaviors. So we have the EQ part.
Yes.
In terms of business, though,
Yes.
just to shift over to that briefly, there's a top-down and a bottom-up approach. Mm-hmm. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
In what sense?
Well, in the sense of each of us has within our power,
Right.
as you said, to create a situation for happiness.
Right.
That being said, if you go to work every day and you're miserable and you're in fear,
Mm-hmm.
you feel like there's no communication or trust,
Right.
and the work is meaningless,
Right.
then it's going to be, well, you can improve yourself as much as you can. You're not going to be the state for happiness. So how, looking at both of those aspects, do you have any thoughts on?
I think you're right. However, there's good news. And the good news is, even in those situations, I think you can be quite happy and have big impact. I give you one example. A couple of months ago, and this person may be in this audience. A couple of months ago, I gave a public talk on a Monday at Spirit Rock. Because Jack Confield teaches on Mondays, and he invited me to co-teach that day. So remember I talked about the habit of loving kindness, right? Looking at somebody and wishing for that person to be happy. So I explained that, and then I made this suggestion. I said, tomorrow when you go back to work, every hour, you look out your office, you randomly identify 2 people, and then secretly, just wish for these people to be happy. I wish for this guy to be happy. I wish for that guy to be happy. No, don't say anything, don't do anything, just wish. That's all. And then go back to work. 10 seconds per hour. That's all I ask. So I made a suggestion. That was Monday night. Wednesday morning, I received an email. So this lady sent me email. She said, I hate my job. I hate coming to work every day. But I tried out the suggestion. And this is the happiest day in 7 years for me. So all it took, like happiest day in 7 years, all it took is intention of kindness for 10 seconds per hour. So I agree that in the real world it's tough. However, I think there are things we can do to at least make it better. And sometimes more than make it better.
Well, I mean, you would think and I think you would agree that, if you will, lack of compassion at your job has a lot of implications, right? I mean, it makes for a worker who's not that productive. Yeah. It makes for them to be unhappy, and it affects the ultimate profits of the thing. So logically, you would sit there and say, well, since we know this is true, why isn't every corporate entity...
Why are they not compassionate? I have a theory. So again, I don't know. Every time I say I have a theory, it means I don't know the answer. I have a theory. My theory is this, that compassionate leadership, it works in the short term and the long term. However, the uncompassionate type of leadership, it works better in the short term at the expense of the long term. So I give you a very simple example, sustainability, right? If you work your people to death, then you can deliver things like now, right? But what's the cost, right? They're not going to do this for the future. It's not sustainable. So the problem with today's world is this. So the first thing is being rewarded on short-term achievements, right? That's, second, so if you're a boss who only have a lot of short-term achievements, and then your boss who is not so compassionate, not so enlightened, will look and say, oh, you delivered more than this other, delivered more than Jim. Okay, how do you do that? I work my people to death. Well, here's a promotion, right? Because they only see the short term. So that's one problem. The other problem, I think, is because most bad managers are good enough. What does that mean? I think in my theory is that it's not that hard to run a business in most cases, right? In most businesses where there's stable revenue and so on and so forth, it's like anybody can do their job, right? I mean, not anybody, like it's a certain level of competency, but it's not that high. It's like even I can do those jobs, right? So if anybody can do the job, you can like not do a good job and just coast along. And coasting along, you can do that for a long time and still produce revenue and profits. So therefore, if you're looking for the downsides, you don't see a lot. What you should be looking for instead is lost opportunities. Where is the upside that we're not getting with those managers? And for that, we have, there's a book called Good to Great. Some of you might have read it. It's the best-selling business book of all time, Good to Great. Yeah, Good to Great, by Jim Collins. I think it's written from Stanford. Yeah. Fascinating book. The book studies, so they look at companies that are good. And then these companies become great. And they try to figure out what is the difference, what made the jump. And the first finding was the leaders. They have a very specific kind of leaders called level 5 leaders. And these are people who are very ambitious and they are very personally humble. So these are people who are ambitious, but they are ambitious for the greater good, not for themselves, right? Then they turn good companies into great companies. So the question to ask is that those managers who they're not very compassionate, not very nice, they're sort of coasting along, they never become good to great companies. Maybe that's the thing you should be looking
Well, maybe they don't become great leaders. Well, but that, in some ways, gets back to my original statement, which is we talked about personal development is sort of the bottom up. But to have great companies, it has to be a top down. You have the right culture, you have the right leader, you have the right values, you recognize the value of your employees.
Right.
In fact, it's interesting because there's this perception, I think this addresses what you were talking about, which is, survival of the fittest or the most ruthless. And I think that's manifested by exactly what you said, where on the short term, there's no question that works. But for a species to survive, and I think this has been shown in a variety of studies, kindness and cooperation ultimately are the criteria for long-term survival of a species, ours too.
Our species. Yeah.
Yes. Well, let's talk about the book.
Maybe I should hold it up
Yes,
so that, just because this is like placement.
Yes.
I can do the Vanna White thing, and flip.
He's paying me for this. He's also a hands model. I don't know if you noticed that. So give us a little history of the part of Google that some people may not know about in the context of maybe going off and doing your own thing, and then the evolution of the book, and then the transition to author and worldwide celebrity and bodhisattva. So I just
Those sounds like the future. In Google, we are allowed something called 20% time. Right? Engineers can spend 20% of the time working on whatever they want. And so I decided that if I can solve any problem, I might as well solve the hardest problem I know, which is world peace. Right? And so that's how I get to work on this stuff. And those things that I was telling you about, like the progression of how to get this done, this was figured out during my 20% time. So after a while, starting in 2007-ish, I figured out this whole scheme, and then we invited some of our mutual friends, Danny Goleman, Norman Fisher, Mirabai Bush, and so on.
Yeah.
So, by the way, this is how we solve problems, at least in Google, but probably everywhere else, which is if you have a problem that you do not know how to solve, you get the best people in the world in that field, put them in the room, and say, let's figure it out. And then you pilot it on an unsuspecting audience, and then you just try to keep fixing it, like launch and iterate, we call it. So that was how we did it. We got Danny and Mirabai and Norman and so on together and hammer it out. And then we launched, oh, by the way, I have to tell you a funny story. So mostly it was like Mirabai and Norman and myself in the room. And when I looked at the two of them, Mirabai was radiating compassion. Norman was radiating wisdom. And I was radiating body heat. So all three of us were radiant beings. Where was I? Oh, okay. So we launched it, and then we just kept iterating to make it better. So that was a process. And then sometime in 2008, because I was spending so much of my time on this, HR invited me. It's like, well, we're starting Google University at that time. Do you want to join us? And I thought about it, and it was under HR, the Google University back then. And I gave a condition. I was like, I will join people ops, or what we call HR function, people operations, under one condition, which is that my work is about world peace and world peace alone, and it's not about benefiting Google. And the VP of HR says, of course. And I was like, wow. I was impressed. I wasn't expecting that. So I joined HR and have been there ever since.
So,
I know, engineer joining HR. And engineer teaching emotional intelligence, right? It's crazy. That's why we know the world is coming to an end.
yeah.
We're all going to die.
No, this is the existence of miracles. Tell us now, so how many people have taken the course?
About 1,000. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have like 250-ish, let me see, 70, yeah, about 250 students per year. And the wait list, the last I checked, was about 600. So I have a few years worth of wait list to clear, and I'm hoping to clear them next year. Yeah. Challenging the impossible, that's what I do, right? To tell another joke. I mean, not a joke, it's true, but it sounds funny, which is when I started on this journey, I think I told you this before, I told all my friends that I knew world peace was impossible, I just didn't know it would be hard.
Maybe for my own selfish interests, you can tell people why you got involved with us or me. Or
because you're so good looking. Besides that, you mean? My eyes! Oh, that's kidding. Just kidding.
What were you looking at? Anyway, we're not going to go there.
So remember what I told you earlier that about world peace, like inner peace, inner happiness, compassion? I actually think that compassion is a trigger point. And I think the three of them has a relationship. Compassion, global compassion, will be the trigger for world peace. However, compassion is unsustainable unless it is founded on the basis of inner happiness. And then inner happiness is unsustainable unless it's founded on the basis of inner peace. Right? So there's a linear relationship. So given that compassion is most important, the biggest issue is that there is no science, at least not that I know of. Right? Simple questions. What is the definition of compassion? It turns out after we started working, right, it turns out there's no definition. Like, I mean, everybody has their own definition. There's no consensus. Right? What's the neurological, what do you call that? I lost the words.
Neurologic basis of compassion.
Basis, okay. Not the word I was looking for, but close enough. Okay. Like, we don't know. Like, compassion in economy, like in management. We know nothing. There's no science. Therefore, I figured one of the most important things we had to do was to create the science around compassion. Turn it into a subject of scientific inquiry. And then when I learned that you were doing this, I had to put my money in.
And he did. And in fact, I mean, honestly, without Meng's support, actually, this conversation would not be happening, and the work that we've been able to accomplish so far really would not have happened. So it's actually been an incredible blessing, but it's also true. And unless we really understand compassion at this very deep level And now Ming says inner peace and inner happiness. But in many ways, this is the ability to be self-compassionate and kind to yourself, because until you care for yourself and you feel comfortable with yourself and you're not beating yourself up, it's hard to sort of reach out and embrace everyone, right? Because in some ways you're angry at yourself, I think.
Be gently, it's okay.
Exactly. Just
for massaging purposes.
Right, exactly. Let me ask you, speaking of Google, yes. Google has grown dramatically. There have been some people who've said, geez, this culture that we had, sort of this entrepreneurial culture has translated into a corporate culture. Is Google really a compassionate place? Does it really do no evil?
I can tell you that everybody I know at least, we're intending to do good for the world. Yeah. So I think that's all that's all I know for sure. But in a big company, 30,000 employees, it's just hard.
Yeah.
I know.
So, do you have brothers or sisters?
I have a brother.
And parents?
Yes. I have parents, yes.
I hope
How did you guess?
Well, no. Since we're talking about miracles, I thought of the Immaculate Conception of Ming. I don't know. I don't know how they do it in Singapore. So this path you've taken.
Yes.
What is your brother and what do your parents think of this, and how is it manifested? Is it simply an acceptance? Is it wow? Is it what drug is he taking? Or all of the above?
Yeah, they think I'm in Colorado all the time. Right? I'm kidding. Just kidding about Colorado. My parents are very proud. Yeah, and I sort of know because my father he's a Chinese gentleman, and so the only way I really know is because his friends tell me. His friends say, your father is very proud of you. Oh, okay. I mean he's very dignified and everything, so it's not always easy to tell. Yeah, mom is very proud. That's more obvious.
Now let's talk about something. I know your daughter. What do you think about beginning these types of practices or teaching early on? And how early is too early?
Traditionally, in traditional Buddhism, you cannot be a monk unless you're 7 years old or older. So there is a minimum age for serious practice. And I think there could be neurological reasons behind that, but I don't know what it is. So for a while, I thought that was the lower bound or upper bound. And I think I'm wrong. I think that simple practices, you can actually teach kids who are very, very young. So one example I know, let me see, it could be Amy's work.
Amy is right there.
It could even be your work, I don't remember. Very skillful stuff. So one example I heard is how do you teach kids to bring awareness to their breathing, to their belly? Right? I mean, adults, you can do bring awareness to Kids, how do you do that? And the skillful way that they employ is to have kids lie down and put a teddy bear and watch the teddy bear, right? Don't watch a belly, watch a teddy bear, go up and down. It's kind of fun, right? And through that, training attention, right? Things that we think of do as adults, training of attention, training of calmness of mind, they can do. So I'm beginning to think that my old belief was wrong, that there is no such thing as too young, I think. But it needs to be done very skillfully. And I'm not skillful enough. I'm not smart like Amy. I'm just me.
So maybe you can give us insights into, this book has...
every time you mention this book, I have to hold it up
exactly.
and do the Vanna White thing.
How's this changed for you? I mean, in the sense of, do you see yourself differently? Is your interaction with the world different? Are your goals different? Is this sort of a manifestation of your effort for world peace? What do you think? What's going on inside of you with the success of this?
One word, mind-blowing. So I give you a confession. When I started working on this book, it was a sort of a throwaway project. So the genesis of this book, what happened was I was actually writing notes for instructors. So I was teaching this course for a while, and the demand kept growing. So we needed more instructors. So I started writing detailed notes for them. So I got detailed enough that basically things that I teach, like almost word for word. And a couple of days of doing that later, I discovered I was actually writing a book. So I said, I might as well turn it into a book project. Like, what do I have to lose, right? So I took 13 weeks off work. So 3 months to write a book. And my boss asked me, can you finish the book in 13 weeks? I said, well, I don't know, but I know one way to find out. And I finished this book in 14 weeks. So it was 1 week more than I expected. And over budget, sorry. And then at that time, I didn't have a publisher, I didn't have an agent. I was going to give it out for free. And so it was like, this is it, right? I just get it done, and I didn't have any expectations. And so I started looking. I wasn't looking for an agent. I was telling myself, let's see if I look for an agent. Let's see what shows up. So I decided to look for the agent who doesn't exist. So I put on my blog, I'm looking for somebody who is primarily driven by compassion, who wants to save the world, who has a practice, who knows the word Dharma in all its different forms, who is a successful agent, who has represented best-selling authors, and even though she's successful, or he or she is successful, is willing to do things in entirely different ways than the old way, and willing to give me a huge discount. And for the last one I wrote, if you have to ask why, you're not a person. And 2 people called me back. 2. I was a bit surprised. Oh, by the way, I wrote at the end of my blog post, I know you do not exist, but if you do exist, let me know. and I found the person. So it's pretty amazing. And then she got this published.
Great. One of our mutual friends is Tim Ryan.
Oh, by the way, I have to say for her benefit, I didn't actually ask for the discount. However, this is what I did. I did ask that whatever, I don't know whether I should review this in public. I will, because it shows the type of good person she is. I told her that I wouldn't ask, the reason I was asking for a discount was because I was giving the money away, and the discount that I was asking was going to be given away. So therefore, I wouldn't ask for a discount, but if you make more than a certain amount, you have to give 1/3 away. And she was like, yeah, I was going to do that already. So that's why I didn't ask for the discount. Yeah.
One of our mutual friends is Tim Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I guess I can also say when the book was launched, we did the party at my house. So,
very nice house.
Yeah. I got a free book. That was the motivation.
And free beer.
Oh, that's right. Lots.
I pay for the beer.
From the profits from the book. But Tim Ryan, who we both know, is a politician. And he's written a book, which was also, we did a thing at the house for that too, called Mindful Nation. And maybe you can give us sort of your insights into, we've just had an election, obviously. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to say who I wanted to win, but why does it seem so hard? And I know these are sort of esoteric questions, but I think you have a lot of insight at this point, and I think you've got a lot of experience, and you know a lot of these people. Why does it seem so difficult when we now have a lot of the science? We know from a lot of literature, not only with practices Meng's Search Inside Yourself practice, with the compassion cultivation program we have at Stanford, with the work that's being done at Emory and at other institutions. And we're seeing overwhelming evidence of the benefit of these types of practices in terms of effect on children and in terms of effect on people's lives. And obviously, I think we both agree that when you open your heart and you're compassionate, you can compromise.
Right.
Why does it seem so hard in politics that these things can't be inculcated into that environment, or it's so difficult to the greater environment?
So I think there are two questions in there. One question is, why is it so hard for politicians? And the second is, why is it so hard to get to the general public? I'll answer the second one first. Why the general public? Because it takes time for this insight to spread. And there is a historical precedence, which is exercise. Right? When was the first time exercise was ever studied by science? Right? 1927. Right? Before 1927, there's no scientific study or inquiry into exercise. And the story I heard, you know the people involved. So
yeah, absolutely.
So the story I heard, and it may or may not be true, and you can tell me how true it is.
That's my job.
Yeah, it's his job. What I heard was the scientists involved, they wanted to study exercise, and the reason is because they themselves were athletes, and they know this is good for people, but there's no science. So they wanted to create the science around it, and they could not find any funding, right? Because in 1927, exercise was weird, right? It's like, who would, run around the block? Like, is that guy crazy? Right? Or take a heavy object and move it up and move it down? Like what are they thinking, right? So they couldn't find any funding because exercise was weird, and the only funding they found was from the army, because the army was interested in soldier performance. So they ended up founding the lab called the Harvard Fatigue Lab. And so they started by studying fatigue in the physical body and how to overcome it. The result of their work, the first result is that the groundbreaking finding is that a fit person is physiologically different from an unfit person. And there's a way to change this unfit person into a fit person. And today we take it all for granted, right? But back then, that was huge, right? And once you have that science, and so you can train it. Yeah, once you have the science that this is doable, everything changes, right? And then you fast forward to today. Everybody's exercising. Everybody knows this is good for my health. This is good for me.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that story is that there's another part of the story, which was that athletes obviously exercise. They knew the benefit of exercise, but the doctors, there were some doctors who were also athletes, and they wanted to actually create a program in the Harvard Medical School, and it was completely poo-pooed as a waste of time. So actually this program did not initially begin in the Harvard Medical School. It actually began in the business school. And then from there, after they created this physiology laboratory, is when all this data came forth, and essentially it is the beginning of what we now recognize as this international exercise. And maybe this now comes to the point of, let's talk about exercising.
I have to mention this. So therefore, your work is that important, right? Because you are the person, people like you are going to be the ones who makes meditation accessible to humanity to that degree, like exercise today.
I paid him for
that. And free beer.
But I think that this brings up the next point, and I think it's really wonderful we've sort of transitioned in this direction, is this concept of compassion as exercise.
Yeah.
And like exercise, and maybe you can comment on this, we've discussed this previously, is it can be strengthened, and as you strengthen it, you receive more benefit. And
Yeah. Yes.
I'm leading them on.
What he said.
So, one of the things actually we've been talking about, and which we've been working on a little bit, is really this idea of a compassion gymnasium. And really it goes back to exactly what Meng was talking about, which is creating this movement where there's a recognition of the value proposition. In his book, which I do really highly recommend, he talks about many of the scientific studies that show the benefit of mindfulness, shows the benefit of compassion and its effect on your physiology. We're actually running out of time, but the reason we're running out of time is so that you guys can ask some questions. So, Ming, I want to thank you for our wonderful conversation, and I'd like to open the forum up for the questions from the audience.
Yes, thank you. If there was a psychopharmacological way of making everybody become compassionate, would you think that's a good idea?
Well, it's called a rave. But I don't go to them.
Really?
But
Just the other day.
who was that person who asked that question? Oh, wait, did she move over? Oh,
Yeah,
there
yeah.
you were. Well, there is some work on MDMA, which is ecstasy, and I would suggest, and I think, and I don't know if that was meant towards Ming, but I don't think there's any question that we're going to find that there are psychotropic agents that have the potential to put us in a state where we're more compassionate. I think the challenge or the question is it sustainable? What does it get you on the long term? I'm not going to say too much compassion, but with any of these drugs, there's a window of therapeutic efficacy, and understanding what that is. MDMA, there's just some literature that's come out on its use in post-traumatic stress disorder, which is an area at CCARE that we're interested in. And in fact, we have begun utilizing our compassion cultivation training program with veterans. But one of my interests is actually to intersect that with the use of MDMA. But you have to understand, even the field of contemplative neuroscience is fairly new. The field of compassion science is really in its infancy, and this is what Ming was talking about. And really, again, it's through support of Ming and others who are excited about the possibilities of this type of work, because I think this is, at the end of the day, going to have a profound impact on our society, and hopefully embraced by our society, or really, frankly, and I'm dead serious, our species does not have a future.
What he said, and I'm concerned about side effects. So this is why I'm not advocating it. And there's an analogy, again a physical analogy, which is steroids. How do you pronounce it? Steroids. Like so, if you look at fitness, so pretend we are in 1935, we've done the study and say, ooh, we can train. Why don't we give them those drugs? Then they can train even better. But, however, it turns out there are side effects that are not good. So I'm concerned that any drug that induces compassion or anything else has side effects that it turns out to not be good.
No, and that's what I was saying. There may be a therapeutic window, but it could have very bad side effects. Why don't we go over here?
I was wondering what your personal practice is now in terms of meditation, and also what you were practicing when you were able to change your set point from what you described as depression into this joy. Thank you.
Okay. So in the past, the practice was very simple. You were just mindfulness on the breath. It was that simple. And my breakthrough, I tell you what my breakthrough was. It was a bit embarrassing, but you appreciate this story, which is when I started meditating, it was very hard. So it was like I bring awareness to my breathing, right? And then it wanders away, I bring it back. those problems are for people much better than me. I had even worse problem than that. My problem was I could not breathe. It's like if I had to bring attention to breathing, I cannot breathe. Because I was like, now breathe, now meditate. And I said, I run out of breath. I'm that bad, right? Whatever problem you have, I'm worse than you. So my first breakthrough was one day I decided, okay, this is too hard for me. I'm not doing meditation. I'm just going to sit. I'm not even going to sit on the cushion. I'm just going to sit on my chair. So I sat on my chair. I would just sit. And after a while, I realized I could breathe. All I had to do was not try too hard, right? Just by being and then observing my being, that was the first time I can bring attention to breathing.
How long were you practicing, or how long do you practice?
So that moment, by the way, that moment alone, that was my beginning, my first access to sukha already. And then after a while, it took a while to consolidate that, a couple of years to consolidate that again. And I didn't do any other practice than that for a long time. And today, my practice is more expanded. So things I've been talking about, the other three pillars.
But do you practice like for 30 minutes at a time or 10 minutes, or is there a particular length of time that you find most helpful?
Today?
Yes, and back then.
Back then. So I try to do, ideally, if I can, I want to do 3 hours a day. But I cannot, right? Because I sort of have a job and so on. So I'm doing 30 minutes a day, and to make up for the rest of 2.5 hours, I do a couple of other things. One thing I do is whenever I don't have to think, for example, walking to the restroom, I bring attention to this area to develop the mental habit of concentration. And whenever I remember, when I see a human being, I remind myself, I wish for this person to be happy. So that's the loving kindness practice. So that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. America prides itself on competition.
Competition.
Especially with the economy and business.
Yes.
So how do we change the economy to the economy?
That's a book. That is a book. Get that agent over there. We take commissions on this too.
He does. And, free beer as well.
Yes, free beer.
And take us to the rave. I actually do not think that competition is in conflict with compassion and kindness. And the illustration is, can you compete against your friends? Yes, right? And you see that all the time, like friends playing basketball with each other, right? So there is a way to compete at the same time preserve the values of the heart. And yeah.
You know, and I think what you're getting at is, there's something we call eustress and there's bad stress, right? A part of our nature...
What was the first one called?
Eustress, EU stress, which is just normal stress. I mean, if
when you stress, I'm good. I'm kidding.
This is probably his most profound insight. So eustress is a normal stress of living, but it allows you to thrive. When you have the right kind of stress, which is what we're made for, you're more creative, you're more productive, you're more insightful, and you connect actually better with people. It's the bad stress. What is the bad stress? It's stress that elicits fear. It's stress that makes you feel you can't trust. It makes you anxious. And when you have bad stress, what does that translate into? It translates into negative emotions, anxiety, depression, sleep disorders, or the mental ones. But then it translates into a variety of body disorders or somatic disorders, cardiac disease, sudden cardiac death, hypertension, gastrointestinal disorders, headaches, back pain, neck pain. So this is what you're talking about. And when it's this excessive type of stress, that's the thing you have to really watch out for. And it manifests itself whether it's in education, whether it's in the workplace, and whether it's at home, actually. Next.
Thank you.
So Meng, thank you very much for coming today. It was very illuminating, and Dr. Doty, thanks for organizing it. My question has to relate more to how do you take this practice and teaching out of Google and out of this auditorium? Because let's be real, this is mostly an elite audience.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
How do you take this practice, this teaching, not just, and take it from the elites? I mean, in Google, you have well-paid engineers and well-paid people. And Stanford here, we're mostly very fortunate people. And take it to people who are struggling to make enough money to survive, struggling to get their kids through school. That's where I see more of the challenge. When I go to a place where there's a good practice, I was invited once to a tea ceremony at Green Gulch. You know, I don't see those people. And so how do you help those people who are struggling with so much and so much bad stress in their lives?
So again, I don't know, but I'm trying something. So we created an organization called the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, SIYLI. It's pronounced as silly. And the mission of silly is, or one of the missions is to bring this out to precisely the population you're talking about. We haven't figured it out. We are trying a few things out. We're trying out putting things on video. We're going to try out free public programs. Yeah, a variety of things. But
just a comment. I mean, I don't want to imply that there's just Search Inside Yourself or there's just what we do at CCARE. There are really hundreds, if not more, thousands of people throughout the world who are taking the research that has developed about mindfulness, compassion training, and actually are creating programs. There is immense interest in these areas. I was just at a conference in London just a few days ago about empathy and compassion in society, and it was focused on healthcare workers, education, and social care. And this was participants from throughout Europe. So I will tell you that we're seeing an ever expanding. And you know, I mentioned Tim Ryan, the politician. There is now a recognition about the value of these, and there are a number of programs that have done, as an example, mindfulness in schools for a lower socioeconomic class. And they've had a profound effect on violence, bullying, and academic performance. But the amazing thing that we see, and I say we just from knowing the science of this, not because I've actually done these studies, but is this sense that, you know, unfortunately, a lot of the kids in these environments, their own parents are having difficulties, right? They're struggling. What's amazing is they take these practices home, and the parents go, you know, what's happened to you? And then they want to learn about it. Because, you know, there's not a person alive who doesn't want to be happy. There's not a person alive who doesn't want to see their children happy. The challenge is giving them the resources to do that. I think that's what we're all trying to do, is to figure out how to make these things scalable, to figure out how we can allow people to incorporate them within their lives in a fairly simple and straightforward. And there are really a lot of wonderful, well-meaning people who are doing this.
Oh, that reminds me. We discovered one of the leverage points, which is teachers. So we taught the class of SIY to a group of teachers in San Jose. And then without telling us, they started teaching it to the kids. And then they reported back to us. And the kids are like taking it, like understanding like journaling and sitting and so on. So what we're going to do, we're going to like focus more on teachers and see how that turns out.
I wanted to go back to the idea of the necessity of a top-down approach to getting the compassion practice widespread. And so the idea that leaders are an important part of that. And from my limited experience of the very elitist paths in the United States, very competitive paths, so going back to competition as well, I find that there's not that much room for developing compassionate practices in elitist paths. The one I'm more familiar with is trying to get into med school right now. So I was wondering what you think are the next steps to try to allow for a better, more open time for compassionate practices for people who are in elitist, highly competitive paths.
I have good news, and I have better news. I don't have bad news. The good news is it's happening already. I think the medical profession is already recognizing all these issues. And for example, Silly has already been approached by some hospitals. So,
Yeah. And in fact, we're actually, our compassion cultivation training is now used in hospitals, and we're also developing a program for corporate environment. But to get back to what you're saying, we know a couple things. We know that this is an environment where competition, sometimes you get leaders, as Ming was alluding to, who are not necessarily the type of leaders who are there for the long-term success. They're very focused on themselves, and they're somewhat narcissistic. And we know that there's a subset of people who get attracted to these positions because the type of behavior they exhibit, which is this ruthlessness, is the type of behavior that's rewarded in some of these environments. Not talking about bankers or lawyers or Wall Street, of course. But the other way to look at this is you also look at the value proposition, because these guys look at the numbers. It is estimated that in the United States there's $150 to $300 billion cost, if you will, of bad stress in the work environment. That's $7,500 per employee. It's a huge cost to the system. We know that just with the issues that we were talking about, healthcare costs are 50% more for people who are stressed. It's a huge, huge problem. So when you can translate this into for that subset of people, just that number and how you can actually improve it by creating the right work environment, they listen to that. And I think there, again, it gets back to there's also a subset of people who just don't know, and if you educate them, they go, oh my God, this is fantastic. In terms of your own situation with med school, why don't you come and talk to me, and maybe I can help you.
I want to add on to that. So that's the good news. There's a better news. The better news is I think that this problem will be solved in one generation. And the reason is because people like you, people who have these practices, able to calm your mind on demand, strong in self-awareness, strong in empathy and kindness and compassion, people like you will be disproportionately successful. And in one generation, you will be the CEOs of the world. Right? And therefore, it's going to solve problems.
Meng
Dan.
and Dr. Doty, hello.
We love Dan. We set him up for this.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Dan's actually spending his sabbatical year with us at CCARE. So he's a plant. He's a plant.
Thank you very much, and I'll expect a free beer from both of you, I guess, on that note.
And you're invited to the rave after this.
Sweet, I'll take the tie off, I promise. Meng, excellent work, fantastic. It does not surprise me at all that in terms of your enlightened principles, you went to HR, being a professor of human resources myself. The point I wanted to drive at is that I do have some concerns in the sense that when I teach leadership courses, for example, I see the drive and the competitiveness that a lot of the folks in the audience are alluding to, and I'm doing some work right now looking at people's preference for maintaining hierarchy in society and the subsequent lack of compassion they have for themselves, others, the high levels of stress, depression, and anxiety. These things seem to be traits, and while I'm very familiar with the good work of EI and Goldman, those elements are trainable, but it seems there's a little bit of a tougher fight sometimes, especially when people who are really interested in competitive vocations like business or neurosurgery, things of this sort. It may be...
You're done. You're done.
Okay. It may be a little bit more of a challenge. So I'm really interested in your experiences with the engineers, and was that an uphill battle, or is there a turning point at some point? Because Emma Sapala actually came in and spoke to my leadership class, and it was really interesting to watch the tug between the two parties. That was a great conversation. So,
I don't think competitiveness is a problem. In fact, you might discover one of the distinguishing features of search inside yourself is we make use of that, right? The reason we teach emotional intelligence and not stress reduction is because these things are good for your success. You're going to get promotions, you're going to earn more money, and so on. So there's a concept in Buddhism called upaya, which is translated as skillful means, which means that don't start where you are, start from where they are, and help them grow into goodness from that point. So starting from competitiveness, the question we ask ourselves is, how do we get that into goodness, right? And so this was by design to not to solve a problem, because it's not a problem, but to facilitate that transformation. And I think that, so in SIY, we learn skills that are good for competitive people and simultaneously good for the world. For example, the ability to calm your mind on demand, right? When everybody's ruffled, there's a crisis, everybody goes, oh my God, we're going to die, and you alone can stay calm. That is a competitive advantage. That will give you a promotion. And it's good for the world. Like if people are calm, for example, kindness, compassion, they're good examples. They're good for your promotions because you get shit done, you get stuff done. Right. And they're good for the world. Yeah, I know I'm being recorded on YouTube.
I'm shocked.
Yeah, I'm shocked. So that is the basic question. How can we train people in ways that are good for the world, good for them, and allow them to continue to be competitive? I think it's highly doable.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So to follow up on the question previous to last, we've talked about developing compassion programs for engineers and other industries. Mm-hmm. But what about fields such as in healthcare and medicine, where the people coming in are kind of almost expected to be, compassionate when they're selected? Is there more or less of a need for developing EI and compassionate training, and especially in elite academic medicine like here? And as a medical student myself, we have classes on health policy and even almost feigning, empathy by phrases like, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that," but is there room for coursework on actually generating genuine compassion?
Yeah. I think here's the dilemma. We know that even with med school, even if you look at the competitive process and other business environments, there's this bell-shaped curve to people. If you want to use compassion as what we're following here, on one end of the spectrum are people who've gone into this profession really for all the wrong reasons. They're ruthless people who are narcissistic, self-absorbed, and they're doing it for the wrong reasons. And the reality is, we cannot do anything with those people. I mean, it's just so deep-seated, they do not necessarily have the ability. Then there's the other group of people who start out for the right reasons, but the process and demands of medical school sort of take away their empathy, take away their compassion, and they're exhausted because they're just trying to survive. And unfortunately, we don't place enough emphasis on self-care, and we don't place enough emphasis on continuing to be compassionate as a physician. And this is a horrible problem that's not necessarily just manifested in medical school. This is a manifestation of the health profession. You look at the situation and the frustration for doctors. On the one hand, we're highly paid professionals. On the other hand, we're now not professionals, we're healthcare providers. So we're commodities. Plus, there's a sense that, they just keep beating down the reimbursement. Yet, you look at family physicians, you look at pediatricians who are working their tails off, yet they're compensated horribly. And in fact, it's analogous to who are the most important people in our society? Certainly pediatricians and family physicians are, but teachers are. And what do? We create an environment that's almost impossible to live. I mean, do you have to live at slave wages to do good? I hope not. I mean, but this is how our society is upside down. But I think there are a lot of people. In fact, there was a $42 million just given to the University of Chicago to train medical students better how to be compassionate and have bedside manner. And I think there's now, and Robin Youngson was here a few weeks ago. Some of you attended his lecture. It's called Time to Care. He's written a book. And he's very interested in this thing about bringing humanity, bringing compassion back to healthcare. So there are a lot of people interested in this. There's a lot of people working on this. And again, I think we're starting to see a sea change in this issue.
I'm very hopeful about this. The reason is because I suspect that compassion and kindness is the default state of doctors. And the reason I think that way is because there's a Chinese idiom a Chinese saying, 医者父母心, which means the mind of a doctor is the mind of a parent. So I suspect that's always been the case until recently. So all we have to do is just return to what we've already been doing.
Yeah. You know, one of the things, I just gave a lecture a while back to the medical students at my school, and we have something called the White Coat Ceremony for the new students. I don't know if they have that here. But, you know, one of the statements I made is, you know, science and technology are wonderful. You know, they've resulted in a huge amount of positive attributes to medicine, cures, in a whole variety of fields. But I will submit to you that cures, in many ways, are manifestations of the art of medicine. And even though I'm a neurosurgeon and I'm highly technically sophisticated in regard to that, I will assure you that in my own practice and what I have observed, it is kindness, caring that manifests themselves in cure. Science and technology are not going to hold the hand of a child who is in pain. Science and technologies not going to soothe the person who's dying. It is the touch, it is the connection that bring life to people. And whether it's in the medical profession or whether it's in life, that's what we're made for. And I think that's where the power is. Yes, sir.
Hi there. Thanks for the conversation this evening. When we have world peace, will the Dalai Lama be a woman?
I would say something, but will the Dalai Lama be? Wow, that's a provocative question. I'll let you answer that.
I have no idea.
Will the
Thank
Dalai
you.
Lama be? Wow, that's going to stick with me tonight.
Let's ask the Dalai Lama next time we
Yeah,
see him.
actually, I'm going to see him in January.
Yeah,
So, okay. I'll ask him that.
So, Your Holiness, are you going to be a woman?
Yeah.
How do you know?
How do you know I'm not? No. Over here before God lightning strikes me down.
So, going back to the beginning of this conversation, you talked about compassion, and you asked the question, what is compassion? And you said to define it, to quantify it, you have to build a science. So just for fun, what's world peace?
Is that world peace or world
Yeah.
World peace.
Peace.
So do we define compassion, by the way? I think.
Well, in the scientific arena, I think people would say that compassion is the recognition of another's suffering, and a desire or an intent to alleviate the suffering is not necessarily actually alleviating it, and that's what most people use.
Okay. World peace. Right now, there is something, I think it's called the World Peace Index. And the way it's defined negatively. It's defined as a lack of conflict. And not just like lack of wars, but also things that are a little bit more subtle, like the number of policemen, number of people incarcerated, and so on. And that index has worked fairly well so far. Fairly well means that it has been predictive. Right? It can do correlations on other factors and so on. So I think that's a good measure, but it's insufficient. And I think a better measure will be the alleviation of all suffering. I think that will be a better. Maybe there's something even better than maybe, which is human flourishing. And I'm not sure how to measure that yet.
Yeah, you know, and the reality, though, is, you know, I think human suffering, to alleviate that, is going to be a tough task. But I think really the question is giving people the opportunity to flourish is really the issue. Because the nature of our paths as humans, on some level, is to have some degree of suffering. It makes us human. When, again, it gets back to this use-stress thing. If it's suffering where we learn lessons, it's beneficial. It's suffering when it destroys us, Next question.
Actually, following on to that question, I would like to ask Meng, how do you define loving kindness? Because there seems to be a lot of confusion out there between loving kindness and compassion.
Loving kindness is the wish for somebody to be happy. Compassion is the wish for somebody to be free from suffering. And why are they defined differently? It's not entirely clear to me. But supposedly they are qualitatively different in the mind. Yeah. So that's the definition.
So compassion is an essential component of Buddhist training. At the same time, science is showing that it can be cultivated in a secular way. And then you gave the example about the woman at work who was just thinking of compassion about her coworkers and how that benefit her. But on the level of acting on compassion, what's guiding it if you're secularizing it from the other stuff, because compassion can go wrong sometimes.
Can you give me an example when it goes wrong?
Well, I think if
when
you
I
think
give
of
too much beer, for
maybe
example?
fundamental religious people who believe certain things are better for the world and harm other people.
Mm-hmm.
So how essential is it for compassion to be guided by something like in the Buddhist tradition, it's wisdom.
Right.
They're essential for each other.
Right.
Is compassion enough, the wish?
Right. Yeah. So I know you know the answer. The framework. The framework is that compassion has to be balanced with wisdom, and wisdom has to be balanced with compassion. How to do it day to day is a little bit tougher, but I get your point, and I agree with you. You're right. It has to be balanced with wisdom.
Yeah, and I would say, though, when you really think about compassion, it's having an open heart to everyone. And that's a challenge of our nature, is this in-group issue and expanding your in-group to include all others. The challenge of the group of people you alluded to, the fundamentalist Christians, as one example, but certainly not the only, is are their hearts really open? They have their in-group of which their heart's open to, but again, the challenge is to open your heart for everyone. In fact, it's funny, somebody posted, I'm on Facebook, not necessarily because I particularly want to be on Facebook, but because we have a CCARE thing on Facebook, so anyway. But some of these people friend me, and I saw this thing today. There was a thing that said, happy holidays, let's put Christ back into Christmas. If you agree with me, or something like this. And I said something like, well, what about the other 4.5 billion people? And wouldn't Jesus say, let's hope everyone has happiness and goodness, not just during the holidays, but every day, and that we give them the best we can as human beings? And it's funny, she looked back to something and says, I just meant for Christians. I go, okay.
Yeah, the other 4.5 billion?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we are celebrating a Festivus.
Yeah, Festivus, yes, it is. So, we only have a couple more questions, but we'll try to get through the rest.
Thank you. I was going to say to the person who's applying to medical school, but then the other person was a medical student, that we actually have mindfulness-based stress reduction as a course in the medical school. It's been there actually for almost 20 years. And one of the interesting things is that at Stanford, you can sign up from both graduate school and undergraduate school into other curriculum, so people can take medical school courses, and we have undergraduates and graduates. But the largest group that takes it is actually from the business school. And I've always thought, seeing these people who are going to be the future business leaders practicing loving kindness to themselves and mindfulness, I can't wait to see that occur. But to exactly what you were saying, one of the theories I have, and Eckhart Tolle talks about this beautifully in the book A New Earth, is that the next evolution, that basically the neuroscience of our brain is that we're tribal, and that we like our team and our people and our religion, and we can operate from that level. But the next evolution is the oneness, that there's no tribe anymore. All living things are our tribe. And so I'm really interested in the neuroscience of that, because I'm sure that you can see that changing in the brain, and I'm wondering if there's anything you know about that.
Sure. It's interesting, a study was done, and I can only tell you sort of generalities of it, but basically they were using oxytocin, which is called the love or nurturing drug or the bonding drug, And they saw this huge effect in terms of this feeling of connection to others when it was given to people. But the interesting thing is, that effect did not extend beyond their defined in-group, right? And that's the problem, right? It's this evolutionary construct of tribalism. Because if you think about as we evolved, you know, we started out as a nuclear family, and that's where these bonds were incredibly important. And then to survive, you had these hunter-gathering relationships, and then that evolution extended. And remember, evolution takes millions of years, while modernity is exponential.
And religion is a big part of that, right?
Well, whatever way you want to separate yourself from others. But so, you know, that's the challenge. Now, the interesting thing is David Destino, I think he's at Northwestern, he's done this work about these in and out groups. And one of the things he's found is that if, let's say, you have an out group, and then you look at them and you start saying, well, is there one thing that I know in common? As an example, geez, that person's a parent. We both want good things for our children. Then it starts lowering the barrier. Then it's, you know, do they like the San Francisco Giants? Geez, I do. But when you start defining these things that actually show you how you're connected, then these barriers stop and you can expand. But, you know, we talk about these courses, SIY, we talk about our course, this 9-week course. This is an ongoing process. You don't learn these things or you don't become Mr. Compassion in 9 weeks. This is an ongoing practice and it's an ongoing struggle. And fundamentally, in some ways, it's an ongoing overcoming other things within your nature. But it's having awareness and self-reflection that allow you to get out of it. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know the neuroscience, but I know the practice. The practice is very simple. As you alluded, it's just, again, training of mental habits. And the mental habits has just 3 points. Looking at a human being, this is a human being just like me. This person wants to be free from suffering just like me. This person wants to be happy just like me. That's it. If you do this enough, then the in-group expands because everybody is just like me. They are in my in-group, all of them. So if mental habits eventually becomes a part of yourself. So that's the practice. We should do a neuroscience study on this.
Let's do it.
I was wondering if either of you were familiar with or have studied on your own or from a scientific standpoint the practice of chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, which is the devotion to the universal law of cause and effect through sound, which enables even the most narcissistic neuroscience to cultivate compassion and wisdom.
You probably meant the most narcissistic neurosurgeon. Yes and no. I've heard of it. I am also aware of the power of music and the neuroscience of that. And if you look at religions as an example, what are they oftentimes? They're ritual, they're sound, they're music, and this engages these brain effects. And so there's no question that it can be extraordinarily powerful. And you know, I don't want anyone to think, and I will tell you I'm not a Buddhist, that somehow...
Nobody's perfect.
Yeah, exactly. That's true.
Just kidding.
But the point is, these practices, number one, they're not isolated just to Buddhism. There are many organizations, entities, philosophies, religions that have components of mental training. And for a large group of people, you know, I don't want to say science is the next religion, but they're grounded in wanting to see empiric evidence. And for that group of people, that's what we try to offer. You know, hopefully we have a smorgasbord that allows everyone to flourish. And at a smorgasbord that there's not a right or wrong. You know, in my own group, I have conversations with some of the people who work with me, and many of these are people who are Buddhist-oriented. And I say stuff like, look, I don't care if it comes from the Book of Mormon, Scientology, or the bathroom wall. I'm only interested if it works. All of this other stuff is irrelevant. If we can find techniques that allow us to reach our full potential as human beings, wherever they come from, it's wonderful. And if we can empirically study them and then give this to people, that's the goal. Yes, sir. This is our last question, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much for the talk. One question. You are both from different cultures, and you men have lived in two very different cultures. Do you think that the predisposition to be more or less compassionate could be part of culture, or could be learned through culture?
So if I understand your question correctly, we are from different cultures as Eng, and the question is whether...
Is based on your experience, how much do you think that compassion practice or the predisposition to be more or less compassionate is learned naturally through culture? I mean, it's part of culture.
How much of compassion is culture? Do you know?
You know, it's also funny when you get on a stage, people somehow think you know stuff. You know?
I'm just here for my good looks.
I have no clue. But you look, I mean, if you grow up in a Buddhist monastery and you're 7 years old, and the ethos of that training is compassion, I would imagine that hopefully some of that's going to sink in. You know, and whether it's cultures, you're defining, let's say, Chinese versus U.S., but even look at, let's even take it down to a lower level. If you grow up in a slum, in a ghetto, around violence, what does that teach you? You know, and I make the argument that, you know, we look at prisons. What are prisons filled with? Do you really believe the prisons are filled with evil people? Now, there's a subset of evil people. They're filled with people who have not had love and kindness demonstrated to them. And their behavior is a manifestation of that. And, you know, we've created that culture. You know, if you look at the United States, we have the largest prison environment that's ever expanding, our number of prisoners, compared to any industrialized country. And what's extraordinary is, you know, you look at the poverty level in the United States, which I think is around 38,000, or for a family of four something. It costs $50,000 a person to incarcerate these people. I mean, how many people in our society would love to have a job that pays you $50,000 a year? I mean, it is insanity how we've created all of these negative sort of things instead of looking at people as redeemable versus, you know, once the way we incarcerate people, we turn them into career criminals and ruin their lives. I mean, it's a horrible thing. And, you know, I don't have a solution, obviously, but I think these are some things to think about. And I would suggest, maybe in closing here, that we all recognize...
I have a point to make.
No, I'm talking.
Okay.
I was at the, like, I'm running to the pinnacle here, damn it. And, like, you're like, what is this? But no, I mean, all of us have really within ourselves some ability to impact someone. And I think that's what Ming was saying. But really, all of us also have the ability to have incredibly impactful. You just have to know that.
I haven't thought a lot about culture, and the reason is because I don't think it's too relevant. I mean, I agree with everything you say, and in addition to that, I think that compassion is wired in, is inborn. There's a simple reason, because we are ultra-social creatures, right? We depend on each other to survive. Therefore, there must be neural mechanism to create ultra-sociality. And one of the mechanisms, I'll try this out later on. We don't have time for this. But when you have time, like randomly pick up two people in this room and just think to yourself, I wish for this guy to be happy, I wish for that person to be happy. See what happens. My guess is you're going to feel happy having those thoughts, right? So having thoughts of kindness, being on the giving end of kindness is intrinsically rewarding. And because of that, compassion is rewarding, and because of that, it's a universal value. All we have to do is to create the conditions for it to flourish.
And on that note, thank you.